Hello everyone and welcome to Byjus Exam Prep IAS. Today in this session we are going to have a discussion on the daily Hindu analysis for the newspaper of 22nd of March 2024. So let's quickly have a look at all the articles that we have today. Now there are these 5 articles that are there for a detailed analysis, where when it comes to the first 3 articles, these are articles which are related to water related issues. And now it's only fair to discuss the issues related to water because this is World Water Day today, that is 22nd of March. So in this context, we see that there are 3 articles in your editorial pages that you have in today's newspaper. So let's have a holistic discussion on all these issues that have been listed in these 3 articles. Then after that, there is another article that is nuclear energy fixing the finance, and it's related to nuclear energy and how we need to look at all the various aspects of financing of nuclear energy. And then the dispute between Pakistan and Afghanistan, will go into the details of that dispute and understand what exactly is happening there. Then from the perspective of the prelims examination, there are these 2 articles. The first one is with regard to the great Indian bustard and the bustard habitat. So let's try to understand that. And then the rules on bioplastics. What exactly do we see as a change in bioplastic rules? So this is what we'll discuss as a part of prelims. And then there are 2 revisited headlines today. These are one related to Agni 5, and we have been discussing about Agni 5 in our analysis in the last couple of weeks. And then Supreme Court stays government notification on establishing fact check unit. So this again has been in the news, in controversy for quite some time. So let's have a discussion on that. So first, let's do a discussion on the first 3 articles which are related to water related issues. First is water and instrument to build world peace. Now what exactly is this article saying? So overall, when it comes to the highlights of this article, there are these things that have been given in this article. Now understand what exactly the article says. First thing is that this year the theme for World Water Day is water for peace. So water for peace is basically the theme of this year's World Water Day, and this is something that aims to highlight the critical role that water plays in promoting peace and sustainability. Now in this regard, when it comes to India, we understand that when we look at the global water crisis, we know that world faces a very significant challenge with regard to water availability, both in terms of the quality of water and the quantity of water that is available. And that's why there are various different factors. The factors, for example, let's say factors related to urbanization or industrialization, climate change, all these are factors that has led to some kind of water crisis in this entire world. So that's why understanding these factors are very, very important. So 3 major factors that we need to understand. 1, urbanization, the role of urbanization, then the role of industrialization, all right, and then the role of climate change. So urbanization, industrialization, and climate change. So these are 3 factors that become very prominent when it comes to the issues related to water crisis. Now when we look at India, what we understand is that India faces extremely high levels of water stress, and that's why we see that significantly there is a water availability decrease that is predicted for India between 2025 to 2050. Now in this particular segment, if you see, agriculture consumes 72% of the water that is available here, and at the same time we see that when it comes to municipalities and the industries, municipalities are using 16% of the water and industries are using 12% of the total water in India. And overall, when we look at India, we understand that in many states in India, groundwater depletion has become a major issue. So whether you look at some of the states in the north or whether some of the states in the south, we see that there are certain issues that we have seen with regard to water crisis. So whether you have the states of Punjab, Rajasthan, Delhi, Haryana, there also we have seen cases of water scarcity, and at the same time we have been discussing about the water scarcity situation in Karnataka as well. So that's why we see that there are all these issues that we see with regard to the water scarcity in these cases in India. Then apart from that, when we look at some of the other aspects of what has been happening in India, I think for some reason one aspect, something has gone beyond this. Yeah. So if you see the rain-fed agriculture that has become crucial for India's game production, this also covers almost 48% of India's land. Now, overall, when it comes to our understanding of all these issues, it becomes very crucial for us to understand that how these things play out. Now, overall, when you look at the water bodies across the countries, you'll see that the water bodies across the countries are being silted up, and that mainly happens because of the fact that there is poor management, and it reduces the storage capacity altogether as well. So that's why there are all these issues that becomes very, very crucial for us to understand from the perspective of what's going wrong with the water bodies across the country. So that's why just understand that silting of the water bodies is one of the crucial issues that we have been facing, and this is something that reduces overall storage capacity. It reduces the storage capacity of the water bodies altogether. Now, overall, we also need to understand, and something that has been highlighted in this point, that rain-fed agriculture, which is crucial for India's food grade production, almost covers 48% of the land in India. 48% of the land. And that's why in this particular scenario, we see that there are various initiatives that have been led by the government. For example, our Prime Minister Narendra Modi, he had emphasized that we have to use traditional and modern techniques for water conservation. And there are various government programs also that have been started for water conservation or rainwater harvesting, and also ensuring efficient use of water. So overall, that's why in this scenario, when it comes to rainwater harvesting especially, it becomes very, very important for ensuring that we can enhance the availability of water and our resilience against drought. And that's why it is something that also supports agricultural production, and at the same time it will help us in maintaining environmental integrity. So there are all these things that we need to understand, but at the same time we also understand that we need to monitor our groundwater levels as well, because we need to improve the water quality. We need to ensure that the pricing of the water usage also happens appropriately, and that is something that will also, and maybe at the same time, adopting better irrigation techniques, efficient irrigation techniques, they also become very, very crucial in these particular scenario. And then apart from that, when we look at some of the further steps that can be taken, integrating the water resource management and community awareness, and along with technological integration, it becomes very, very crucial for us to have sustainable water management. And overall, that's why these three becomes very important steps, that you integrate water resource management, community awareness, and the technological integration along with these two. So that's why these three aspects will become very, very crucial for any sustainable water management. And overall, at the level of policy and community arrangement, we need to understand that we need to emphasize on water conservation and also the revival of the water bodies, and maybe also community participation in water management. So that's why when it comes to all adopting all these things, it becomes very, very crucial in this regard. And that's why there is a need for research and development in water technologies as well, and ensuring that there is an integrated approach that we take to water management altogether. Now overall, if we think about the future, that what is a future direction that we can take, so overall a comprehensive approach is required, whether we can have monitoring, technology, community arrangement, and policy reforms. All these things, they become very, very necessary to address the water scarcity and ensure water security for the country. So that's why there are all these mitigation steps that we have to look at with regard to what the water crisis in India is looming, and especially given the fact that there are various data that support the theory that water scarcity in India is going to become even more severe in the coming 25 years. We need to look into all these aspects of whether it is all the aspects of sustainable water management, whether it is about the education and awareness of the people, whether it is about how the government initiatives can work, and at the same time how technology further can also help in understanding of how a better water resource management technique can be adopted. So that's why there are all these things that we need to understand from the perspective of what's happening here in India. Then the second article that we have, and this is an article in the editorial page written by Tim Curtis, who is the director of UNESCO New Delhi Regional Office for South Asia and UNESCO representative to India, and that's why a very prominent figure, and he has written, and the second editorial that we are discussing here, navigating the global waterscape and its challenges. Now, in this regard, when it comes to this, again, it is in the context of the World Water Day 2024. We know that it is being celebrated with the theme leveraging water for peace. Now, what do we mean by leveraging water for peace? The theme basically is something that emphasizes the critical role that water management plays in promoting peace and preventing conflicts all across the world. And that's why it becomes very, very crucial, that it says that there is a critical link between water management and peace, and that's why it becomes very crucial. Now, overall, when we look at this, we need to understand that UNESCO, under the World Water Assessment Program, actually had spearheaded a development report, and the title of the report was Water for Prosperity and Peace. Now, this report has been a part of UN Water's effort, which actually has been coordinating various efforts with regard to the water scarcity and water related conflicts altogether in the world. And that's why there are various UN entities and international partners who have been there as a part of this report. So that's why this report, the name of the report is Water for Prosperity and Peace. Now, when it comes to this particular water report that has been published, we need to also understand the historical significance of water, because when we look at the report also reflects that how water has been very, very important to the development and the downfall of some of the greatest civilizations. And that's why there have been various conflicts also over water resources, where you look at the entire world, you'll find that there have been a lot of these kind of disputes that have happened. Even if you go back to the Mesopotamian times, you'll find that there also these kind of disputes have happened. So, and those kind of disputes used to happen. So, for example, the conflict between the Lagash and the Umma, this was in the Mesopotamian area, and this was largely with regard to irrigation. This was a fight for getting water, to get water for irrigation. So that's why we know that this kind of conflict has happened in the past, and this conflict led to what is considered to be the world's first peace treaty. That basically this was the first time that there was a peace treaty that was signed, and this is something that we are talking about the Mesopotamian times. So that's why we understand that the water related conflicts is not something that the world is facing today. It has been a very important problem, and it has been a very ancient problem in this world. Now, overall, we need to also understand right now that there is a part that climate change also plays in water security. When it comes to today's climate crisis, which is being manifested in very extreme weather conditions, whether it is about heat waves or floods or maybe water insecurities that are being developed worldwide, we see that there are significant impacts that it has worldwide. And in this context, in India also, we know that there has been a lot of problem, especially when it comes to, let's say, the erratic monsoon patterns that we have seen in India, which disrupts agriculture and which becomes a very key problem for the country altogether. So that's why we need to understand that whether, even if we talk about in context of India, we know that there has been a situation of erratic monsoons, and this erratic monsoon has had a negative impact on agriculture. So that's why it can have significant problems. It can create significant problems for the Indian economy. So that's why we need to understand that this can disrupt agriculture, which becomes a very key component of our economy. So that's why we need to understand the importance of water diplomacy in this regard. That in the light of climate change and increasing water insecurity, the report also talks about the fact that it is very necessary to improve the cooperation over water sharing, and it advocates for adoption of universal principles of international water law to ensure that there is a sustainable use of shared waters, and also promote water as a force for peace among all the nations in the world. So that's why it talks about that there is a requirement for improved cooperation and sustainable use of shared water to promote peace in the world. And that's why it calls for equitable water allocation among the nations to foster regional stability and peace. Now this is where we understand that the water scarcity and uneven distribution of water resources, it requires a collaborative governance effort. And that's why this approach is required, so that we can foster regional stability and peace, and also recognize all the interlinking between the water management, climate change and international security at the same time. So that's why it becomes very crucial for us to understand the link that we have between these three aspects of the link that we have between water management, climate change, and international security. So we need to understand that when we talk about it, these are things which are linked. These three things are linked together. So that's why we need to understand that they have to be seen in this manner, that these are all the things which are linked together, and we need to understand to have an inclusive water diplomacy efforts altogether in this world. So that's why it becomes very crucial that overall, when we look at the efforts that are required, we understand that we need to have an inclusive water diplomacy effort, as the article also highlights. The report that has been published, the report has also called for inclusive water diplomacy, meaning that we need to understand that especially for the indigenous and the local communities, and at the same time all the research that we are doing, we need to understand how exactly the effort has to be made, including all of them. And that's why all these stakeholders, they can contribute very valuable insights, and they can help in facilitating political process to prevent and mitigate all the water related disputes. So that's why it talks about this, that how exactly can we look at the indigenous communities and academia. So in the indigenous communities and academia, how exactly we can include both of them, so that we can ensure that we are taking all the stakeholders who are a part of this, and then after that we can facilitate a political process, so that we can prevent and mitigate the water related disputes. So to prevent or mitigate water disputes. So that's why it becomes very, very crucial in this regard, that we have a combination of all these people, and then only all these things can be done simultaneously. Now overall, when it comes to the understanding of the global water challenges that we right now have, we understand that the concern that has been raised in this article, or this report rather, also has been with regard to that there is a shortage of water quality or data as well in this world. And overall, apart from that, we see that there is a very significant urban-rural divide in the access to drinking water services all over the world. The report also has highlighted that a majority of these also have been lacking in access, especially when it comes to the urban areas. And that's why in this regard, when we look at rural India's water requirements, we just also discussed that more than 70% of agriculture is dependent on, I mean, more than 70% of water is occupied by or is used by agriculture in India. So we know that agriculture remains predominant source of livelihood for the rural population in India, and that's why it also accounts for significant proportion of fresh water use. And that's why improving water accessibility in these kind of areas can also yield very sustainable benefits in health, in education, in employment, in all these things with regard to the rural areas in the country. So that's why for rural India also we need to understand all these aspects of how exactly it can have a positive impact on the people living in these areas and all the social standards which are required to maintain a healthy lifestyle. So that's why it can also help in maintaining their health and education. In maintaining their health and education, and also maybe let me also write about employment. Then the article or the report, it also talks about how we can leverage technology in agriculture. And in this regard, especially it has mentioned about artificial intelligence, that how artificial intelligence, effective use of artificial intelligence in agriculture for water conservation can be very, very promising, and that's why it can help us in achieving sustainable and productive outputs at the same time. So that's why it talks about how AI can be used in agriculture, and it can help us in addressing issues related to food scarcity or crop losses and the excessive use of chemicals. So it can actually highlight all these issues related to agriculture so that we can take measures which are related to all these aspects. Similarly, it also talks about transboundary challenges, that we have seen that the article or the report, it also has emphasized that there is an importance of managing transboundary waters as well, which actually are constituting a very large proportion of the entire world's freshwater resources. And that's why effective governance of all these resources becomes very, very crucial for equitable water allocation among all the nations which are sharing this water. So that's why it highlights the need for sophisticated governance of world's transboundary waters, which accounts for 60% of the freshwater flows in the world. And that's why we need to understand this, that despite the global recognition of the importance of transboundary water cooperation, the report has indicated that only a very fraction of the countries are actually sharing water resources, and they have reached a comprehensive cooperation in their agreements. So overall, that's why it has talked about the need that we have to make further efforts in this particular regard. So for example, as you can see here, only 24 out of 153 water sharing countries have reached a complete cooperation agreements, and that's why it talks about the enhanced transboundary governance that we need today. So that's why when it comes to this report, these are some of the highlights of the report among the water resources that are available in the world, and how peace is related to water, how global peace is also related to water, and how water sharing efforts are required in this world. Then coming to the third article, this is about how water insecurity affects women. Now overall, when it comes to this article, it has highlighted certain data with regard to water in India, or water especially in rural India, and how women especially are affected. And then it also talks about some of the initiatives that have been taken by the government to also try and solve these problems, and there are certain examples that have been taken in this article to also highlight the importance of all these aspects. Now overall, when we look at this article, it says that over 41% of the rural households, in India lack access to safely managed drinking water within their premises, according to the National Sample Service 78th round, where this indicator survey was conducted. Now overall, what we see that households actually, they very often in these households, women very often need to travel somewhere between 200 meters to up to 1.5 kilometers or much more than that in many of the cases for accessing their primary water resources. So on an average it says that the distance that they need to travel is somewhere between 0.2 kilometers to up to 1.5 kilometers to access their primary water resource. To access their primary water resource, they have to travel somewhere between 0.2 to 1.5 kilometers altogether. And that's why it talks about the geographical disparities. That overall we see that despite all the improvements that we have seen, there are significant disparities in the access to safe drinking waters all across the country, where we see that obviously India constitutes almost 18% of the global population, but when it comes to the water resources, India has less than 5% of world's water resources. And this is where it highlights the issues that India is facing altogether. Now, especially when it comes to the impact of water scarcity, it talks about the fact that the impact of water scarcity is also gendered, meaning that water scarcity, we see that is affecting women more than men. So in this regard, it talks about that water collection is predominantly seen as a women's responsibility in areas which have limited access to water. And that's why we see that it places a considerable time burden on women and girls, and it also affects their daily lives. Or in all these cases, we see that it can even lead to gender related violence as well. So that's why, and this is something that is not unknown to us, that we know that when it comes to water collection through their primary resources, especially in the rural parts of the country, it always has been seen as women's responsibility to go and be the collector of that water and ensure that water availability is there for the household requirements. And that's why in this regard, it talks about the fact that the impact of water scarcity is also gendered. The fact that it affects women more than men altogether. Moreover, it also talks about the fact that it also has an impact on their education and health. That water insecurity, it actually negatively impacts the school attendance and the academic performance of the girls as well. And at the same time, it has led to health issues also, which are affecting these women. So unfortunately, we have seen these kind of issues, and we see that the women are actually exposed to open defecation practices as well, and that's why they face increased risk of violences also, and some kind of psychological stress as well that comes with all these issues. So that's why all these things are something that are affecting women more than men. So that's why there are initiatives that are required, and this is in regard to where we see that there are certain initiatives that now have been taken by the government. And in this regard, one very important scheme has been the Jal Jeevan Mission. So when we talk about the National Jal Jeevan Mission, it becomes a very prominent resource here, because when it comes to these kind of initiatives that we have, they actually represent a very significant shift in water management policies, because we are now trying to aim to provide drinking water through household tap connections through this particular policy. Now overall, when it comes to this effort mainly has been intended to also reduce the total problems that the women especially have been facing, so that they can be enabled, that they can have much more productive time, and that's why they can also have a better and a greater participation in community and engagements as well. So that's why a tap connection in households will be a very significant step in solving some of the gendered problems that we have in water distribution with regard to water scarcity. So that's why this mission, it also encourages women's involvement in Pani Samitis for planning, implementation and maintenance and monitoring of the water projects. So that's why in this regard also the Jal Jeevan Mission becomes very crucial, because this is where it is calling for more participation of women, and that's why the guidelines that have been given, they actually suggest that the training has to be done at least for 5 women for each and every village, where water monitoring, water quality monitoring, empowerment, and at the same time ensuring quality water delivery is also ensured for them. So that's why it talks specifically about the fact that there should be at least 5 women from each village, at least 5 women from each village, so that they are a participant in all the water management that is being considered by the government. Now, in this regard, there is a study that also has been discussed in this article, where the study talks about the impact that it has on women. So the study that was conducted across rural areas in 3 Tamil Nadu districts, there also they found that the household access to safe drinking water has reduced the time that the women spent in collecting water, and at the same time it allowed them to have more time for the household management, children's education, and also in childcare. So in this regard, when we look at this, we can say that in a manner, the empowered women, they spent less time in fetching water, and that's why they exhibited better mental health indices as well. The study also has found that there is a positive correlation between water access and sanitation access at the same time. That with better water access, we see that there are improvements in the sanitation also in this regard. So that's why when it comes to this, we need to understand that there is a need for gender mainstreamed policy for the environment as well. That India's progress on water and sanitation access, it also has to include gender consideration as well, and that's why it has to focus on reducing the school dropout rates among the girls, and also alleviating the drudgery for the rural women. Now, in this particular scenario, when it comes to this, monitoring of the process becomes very, very crucial. That it not only involves water access or quality matrix, but at the same time also ensure that gender specific goals are also taken there, so that it can lead to better socio-economic improvements for the women in the rural areas especially. So that's why these all things, especially in the context of rural women, becomes very, very crucial. And for us to understand that water scarcity is a problem for everyone, but unfortunately there is a gender bias that we see in water scarcity as well, that it affects more, it has a problem, it creates a problem more for women than for men. Then coming to the next article, and this is about nuclear energy fixing the finance. Now in this article, this basically talks about the first ever nuclear summit that was held, and this was held in Brussels on March 21st. Now this is where we saw that the Belgian Prime Minister was also a part of it, and at the same time IAEA Director also was a part of this particular summit. Now this is a summit where we see that it talked about nuclear energy's role in climate change mitigation. Now overall what we understand is that when it comes to this particular energy source, when it comes to nuclear energy, we saw that in COP28 also the role of nuclear energy was highlighted. That we saw that the leaders had also called for increasing the nuclear capacity, rather talking about tripling the nuclear energy capacity by 2050 to meet the climate goals. Now in this regard, there is an initiative that has also been mentioned in this article, and this is about Atoms for Net Zero program. Now this is something that is focusing on decarbonization through multilateral approach, and it is trying to, so as you can see that you have the Atoms for Net Zero initiative. Now this is where it is talking about how exactly we can ensure that carbon footprint can be decreased. It has highlighted that nuclear power's role in decreasing the carbon footprint is very, very vital. And that's why it needs to be understood that nuclear power has its own advantages, that it can reduce the carbon footprint, it is reliable, it has low operating cost, and it has smaller land requirements compared to other renewable energy sources. So that's why it becomes very crucial in this regard for us also to understand its role altogether in this scenario. And then when it comes to its role, we understand that when it comes to this, they also have very important role to play with regard to uh, reducing the total burden of carbon in the world. Now, overall, when it comes to this, we also have to understand that using nuclear energy has not been very easy. Although we have seen advancements in nuclear technology, there are newer kinds of nuclear reactors that have also come in. But at the same time, there is one problem that we see, and that is about the fact that the financial support has still remained very limited. And in this regard, we are also talking about the multilateral development banks. Now, multilateral development banks and the private investors, they haven't been very participating in terms of nuclear energy. The kind of role that these institutions have played in other renewable energy like solar energy, wind energy, geothermal energy, etc., we have seen that they actually haven't played a similar role in terms of nuclear energy. And that's why the last significant financing that was done by a multilateral development bank was way back by World Bank in 1959, and that was in Italy. So after that, we haven't really seen any kind of funding in this regard. So that is where we need to understand that it has to come in this further scenario, because when we see there are successful cooperative funding models that exist in some parts of the world. For example, France, South Korea, Russia, UK, in all these cases we have seen that they have shown viable path for nuclear project financing. And that's why they actually can help in this particular regard, because we see that there is a very important role that these private financings can play. Now, overall, we see that the total global nuclear coverage or capacity has also been increasing altogether. That overall, when you look at the worldwide data, there are 440 reactors worldwide, there are 60 which are under construction, and there are 110 which are planned altogether, and most of these are in Asia and particularly in China. China basically right now has been very aggressive with its nuclear policy, and it also has pictured some aims where they have been saying that they aimed for making nuclear energy at least 10% of their energy, taking almost 10% of the energy requirements by 2035, and it further they want to increase it to having 18% of the share by 2060. So they already have shown this, and that's why they have shown a significant shift towards nuclear power altogether. So overall, that's why we see this, and this is where we have seen that there are financial and operational challenges that have impacted the companies and the projects altogether in this regard. Where, for example, let's say when you talk about certain plants, an example of new scale power has been given in this particular article, where we have seen that it has faced bankruptcy because of a shortage of funds that it has seen. Now, overall, when it comes to India's scenario, we understand that when it comes to clean energy, nuclear power remains a very minor part of India's energy program. Overall, when you look at the total participation of nuclear energy, it lies to just around 2% right now. Some data says less than 2%. This article says just 1.6%, although the official data would say 2%. So it accounts for almost 2% of India's renewable energy mix. And that's why we see that there are various different challenges that we have in this particular regard, whether it is regarding the safety or the stigma that we have altogether, the initial cost that we have, nuclear accident, and all the fears that we have with regard to it. So there are all these things that we need to understand, and that's why in India, although we still see that there are these problems. So India has been witnessing that nuclear industry has been growing in India, but overall we see that we still need to do a lot more. The government of India also has sought almost $26 billion in private investments in India by 2031-32. So $26 billion by 2031-32 in private investments. In private investments. And very recently we also saw the fact that our Prime Minister also was involved in the new capacity that we have built up with the prototype fast breeder reactor, and we saw that he was also there when it was being loaded. Now this is something that also highlights that now we are also trying to be aggressive towards advancing our nuclear capabilities. This is where it shows that when it comes to this prototype fast breeder reactor, it is very, very important because it is able to generate both fuel and power both at the same time. That is the whole idea about the breeder reactors, that you will get more fuel than that you have consumed, and that's why you can keep using the same as and when you want. So that's why it becomes very, very crucial in this regard in increasing India's capacity, and it becomes a very crucial part of India's nuclear program. Because overall, when we are talking about this financing, we also have to understand that when we look at the reports with regard to nuclear power, nuclear energy, you will find that nuclear energy is something that is very, very clean. Even when you compare it to solar energy or wind energy or geothermal energy, the data says that the carbon footprint of nuclear energy is significantly lower compared to solar energy also, wind energy also, geothermal energy also, which are the clean energy sources for us right now. So that's why this nuclear energy becomes very, very crucial in this regard, and that's why this article highlights that although a lot of financing has happened in the renewable energy sector, but at the same time the nuclear energy sector also needs a lot of financing so that we can start moving faster in making this capacity better. Now coming to our next article, and this next article is why did Pakistan carry out airstrikes in Afghanistan. Now this is an article with regard to the recent developments that we have seen in the Pakistan-Afghanistan border, and that is where we saw that there was an attack, a terrorist attack that happened on Pakistan Army, and then Pakistan Army retaliated in that sense. So that is basically what this article is highlighting. Now overall, when it comes to just understand where did it start from, the escalation basically happened when Pakistani fighters they launched airstrikes in the Afghan provinces. Now in the Afghan provinces of Paktika and Khost. Now these are the two provinces there they launched an attack, and this led to deaths of at least 8 civilians according to Afghan officials. Now when it comes to this, these are, you can say, they were pre-drawn dawn attacks that happened, and this drew very strong condemnation from the Taliban, who also retaliated by attacking the Pakistan military posts along the border with use of very heavy military weaponry. Now when it comes to this, when you look at the background to these tensions, this is where lies the breakdown of ceasefire between Pakistan and Tehreek-e-Taliban in Pakistan. Now Tehreek-e-Taliban in Pakistan, or TTP as it is called, this was something that happened in November 2022, and this is where we see that there is a lot of complexity that has now started coming into the picture, where we see that a lasting peace could not be brokered between the two parts, or this basically led to the end of ceasefire. Now this end of ceasefire saw a regrouping of the TTP launching very widespread attacks across Pakistan, and that is why it has led to significant rise in terror related incidents and fatalities that Pakistan has seen. Now overall, central to all this dispute is basically the Durand Line, and we'll discuss about the Durand Line later also, where we see that this basically is the border between Pakistan and Afghanistan. Now this Durand Line is something that Pakistan recognizes, but Afghanistan has disputed it, and the Taliban especially, it very firmly has rejected this line as the permanent border between Pakistan and Afghanistan. So that's why we have seen that, especially since the time it came back in power, we have seen that they have been raising the issue with regard to the Durand line, and and that's why we have seen that there have been many incidences on both the sides of the border. So that's why we see that overall, when it comes to how it all started, this basically the trigger for Pakistan airstrike was an attack that happened on March 16, where a suicide bomber targeted Pakistani soldiers in North Waziristan, which killed 7 of its soldiers. Now, this is where we saw that it was condemned, and it was and the Pakistan also said that they will retaliate on this, and this is where we see that subsequently we see that Taliban actually had claimed that all the Pakistani airstrikes that had targeted civilian areas in their districts, this is also going to have a payback from their end. So overall, we do not know where exactly this is going to head, but we already see that these tensions have started escalating between Pakistan and Afghanistan at this point of time. And Pakistan, we have seen that repeatedly has expressed its concerns over the sheltering of the terrorist groups in Afghanistan, including the TTP again. Now, in this regard, the group that belongs to Hafiz Gul Bahadur, that group also has been the highlight of all these tensions and escalations, and we'll discuss about that also here. And overall, we have seen that this is something where all these tensions have been escalating, and now we have seen that Taliban also has said that they basically have issued stark warnings, and they have said that there will be very bad consequences for these kind of actions if they continued. So that's why escalations of these tensions have happened between Taliban and Pakistan, and we need to understand where exactly the things are headed and what kind of problems do we have in all these cases. Now, overall, when it comes to Taliban denied that they are giving any kind of shelter to TTP militants. Taliban also acknowledged the challenges that you have because of the rugged terrain that you have in Afghanistan. So that also becomes very, very difficult for them also to monitor the militant activities according to Taliban. Now, when it comes to this entire scenario, let's try to understand where the problem lies. The problem lies first and foremost in this Durand line. So this red colored line that you see, this is called as the Durand line, which is the line that basically divides Afghanistan and Pakistan. So this is almost a 2600 kilometers long border between Pakistan and Afghanistan. Now this is something that was established way back. It was established way back in 1893. Now in 1893 there was an agreement that happened, and this was an agreement that happened so that there will be a division that will happen between the British India then, when it was a combined India and Pakistan, and the lines which will be called as Afghanistan. So that's why there was this this agreement that was done, and this was an agreement that happened in 1893. So 1893 between British India back then and the Emir of Afghanistan back then. So this was a pact that happened in 1893, and this divided the border between the British India and Afghanistan back then. Now this agreement, this was basically intended to fix the limit of their respective spheres of influence, and that's why it might also help in improving the diplomatic relations and trade between British India and Afghanistan. Now the problem is that this Durand line, it cuts through the Pashtun tribal areas, which divides the ethnic Pashtuns and Baloch people between these two countries. Now this division, that's why it has led to significant geopolitical and ethnic tensions over the past years, and that's why we have seen that Afghanistan historically has been disputing the legality of this border, leading to straining its relations with Pakistan. So if you look at this line, this basically, if you see this line basically cuts between the borders of the Pashtun areas. As you can see, that Pashtun areas are there in both Afghanistan and Pakistan, but it just cuts between them, and that's why there are all these issues that start from there on. So overall, that's why we see that it has led to straining of the relations between Pakistan and Afghanistan, because this border region, it has been characterized by a lot of problems, because it has a very porous border, and that's why it has allowed for the movement of people and goods as well. But at the same time, also the militants, which has been a big challenge, and it becomes a continuous source of the conflict that happens between Pakistan and Afghanistan in this regard. And that's why Afghanistan always has said that this is not a permanent border. They do not see this as a permanent border. They say that this was not intended to be a permanent border between British India and Afghanistan. So that's why they claim many of these Pashtun areas, that these areas should belong to Afghanistan. And Pakistan says that this is a permanent border. So that's why these areas belong to Pakistan and they do not belong to Afghanistan. This is what Pakistan says. Now in this entire problem, there is Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan, that is TTP. Now TTP, something which is also called as the Pakistani Taliban many a times, it is a militant group that emerged in the late 2000s, you can say around 2007, and it became an umbrella group, an umbrella organization for various different Islamist militant groups that were operating in these kind of areas, especially the FATA areas that we have along the Afghanistan-Pakistan border. So in these FATA areas, this became an organization which started becoming an umbrella organization for many of the Islamist militant groups that are lying in that area. So that's why we see that significantly we need to understand the aspects of TTP and how it has been influential altogether. So overall, the formation basically happened back in 2007, more or less you can say, and this is where it started uniting all the other leaders and groups also which were opposed to the Pakistani government and the policies of the Pakistani government when it is aligning with the US led war on terror in Afghanistan. So that's why we see that the war on terror, that after the incident 9/11 incident that happened in the US, we know that US went into Afghanistan, and this is where these militant groups now started assembling and saying that Pakistan government should not be supporting US operations in Afghanistan, and that's why they were opposing Pakistan in this particular scenario. And at the same time, they also started talking about the other things like the imposition of the Sharia law in Pakistan, opposition to the Pakistan military's involvement in all the tribal areas in Pakistan and Afghanistan. And also they also said that they are going to retaliate against Pakistan because it is cooperating with the West in these kind of activities. So that's why we see that this is something that was happening now. Now, although they had ideological similarities, the operational link between the Pakistani and the Afghanistani Taliban, we see that has not been very significant, because TTP has been operating independently and has a very specific focus on Pakistan, and it has largely had a problem with Pakistan more. Now overall, when it comes to both the groups of Afghanistan and Pakistani Taliban, both the groups now have been united because of the common, you can say, religious beliefs that they have and the opposition to the foreign intervention that they have in this region. But the targets and objectives of these two have been different. So overall, that's why we see that there have been a very complex web that has been created altogether. Now TTP also has been involved in numerous high profile attacks that have happened in the Pakistan in the last, you can say, 10 to 15 years. Incidentally, the unfortunate attack that happened in 2014 in Peshawar, where it killed almost 150 people, and mostly among them were school children. So overall, that's why we have seen that there have been a lot of issues altogether. Now there is a very peculiar scenario here that we see altogether, and this is with regard to what Pakistan considers as good Taliban and bad Taliban. Now let me also analyze for you another article that we had, and this is the article in the Dawn newspaper of Pakistan. So let's go beyond the Hindu analysis, let's go beyond the Indian newspapers, and let's go to a Pakistani newspaper and what exactly this has been saying. Because for a very long time we have been talking about the good Taliban, bad Taliban scenario for Pakistan. That So what is good Taliban, what is bad Taliban, and how exactly now we see that something that they considered as good Taliban now isn't a very good Taliban for them anymore. So what we have seen is that there has been a shift in stance, that initially something that was considered as good Taliban for not attacking Pakistan's security forces, we see that now this group, we are talking about the Hafiz Gul Bahadur group, this now has also been implicated in terror attacks that have happened within Pakistan, in especially the Khyber Pakhtunkhwa region. And that's why in this particular scenario, it has, in a manner, it has altered the perception that they had of good Taliban, and we see that now it is also being considered as the bad Taliban. Now overall we have seen that there are recent violences that have happened. The group that we are talking about, the Hafiz Gul Bahadur group, it has been blamed for very significant attacks that have happened, including the suicide bombing that happened in the North Waziristan that killed 7 Pakistani soldiers recently. And subsequently we saw that Pakistani airstrikes in Afghanistan happened, which targeted the Gul Bahadur group, and that's why it has escalated the tensions and concerns about the region's stability. Now when we look at the this article also talks about the background of the Hafiz Gul Bahadur group, which basically when it comes to this entire group, we see that historically it has its roots in resistance. It also has been related to a lot of issues which are related to the conflict that happened in Afghanistan with regard to the militancy in that particular region. Now overall we see that it started to rise into prominence, although initially we know that Pakistan's initially there was a tolerance of the militants, and that's why after 2001 we saw that the military cooperations that started happening against the foreign militants, so-called foreign militants, they started strengthening the local militants in Pakistan as well. And that's why in this particular scenario we see that this particular group now starts to become a major player in Pakistan, and overall we see that they start to rise in their power. And overall when we talk about all these scenarios, we saw that there was an attempt by Al-Qaeda back in the early 2000s. There was an attempt by Al-Qaeda to unify the Pakistani Taliban group under the TTP banner back in 2007. And this is where Bahadur's faction, it remains separate. And that's why it focused only on insurgency in Afghanistan rather than what is happening within Pakistan. So that's why from this perspective it was good for Pakistan, because it was not doing anything within Pakistan. And this is where we see that this particular group, it also started to benefit from the ties that we had from many influential groups, including the Haqqani network and Al-Qaeda. And this is where they started receiving support in terms of the safe havens and also manpower and weaponry in particular regards. So this is where we see that this is where you can say a transition starts to happen, that they start to transition from a good Taliban to a bad Taliban, meaning that the peace agreement that happened with the Pakistani government, it ended back in 2014. And this is where we see that the military's tactics and the displacement of this particular group's family or Gul Bahadur's family members, this is something that started fueling the anti-government stances that this group started taking after this incident. And that is where we see that it started behaving like a bad Taliban for Pakistan. And recently we have seen that they have also started collaborating with the TTP, because what we have seen is that after Taliban's takeover in Afghanistan back in 2021, the group and the TTP, they started showing signs of cooperation. And that is where we see that the talks of merger also started happening between these two groups, that they should have a unified platform so that they can raise the concerns with regard to the escalating violence that is happening in the southern parts of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa and all the challenges for the security forces that are being conducted there. So that's why we see that there are a lot of tensions that are being created, and that's why we also say that a lot of problems that Pakistan has started facing of late, especially in the last 1 decade, they are also the problems that Pakistan created for itself. That when they started talking about good versus bad Taliban that okay, this Taliban works for us because they do not carry out attacks in Pakistan, they are only carrying out attacks in Afghanistan, and they are whatever they are doing in the tribal region, so we don't care. But then after that, once they started getting support, finances, everything, and then they started uniting with the Talibani groups in Afghanistan as well, and the anti-Pakistan Talibani groups as well. This is where we see that all these issues start to escalate for Pakistan as well, and today all the Taliban has become bad Taliban for Pakistan. There is no more any good Taliban or so-called good Taliban for Pakistan, and this is where we see that all these tensions have been escalating on Pakistan's western borders. Now coming to the prelims articles, the first prelims article that we have today is panel to study scope of altering power lines in bustard habitat. Now this basically is talking about a new committee. The Supreme Court basically established an expert committee to find a balance between protecting endangered great Indian bustard and promoting the renewable energy resources both at the same time. Now in this regard, when it comes to this particular case, we understand that when it comes to the great Indian bustard has been a significant part of India's conservation efforts, because this is where we know that their numbers are very, very low, and if we do not take steps, will not be able to have them survive for long. Now the great Indian bustards, we know that they are critically endangered species, and that's why there are a lot of problems that have caused the decrease in numbers that we have seen, and we'll discuss more about that as well. So overall, we see that there was a previous Supreme Court directive in April 2019, and this was basically to bury the power cables underground so that we can ensure the safety of these birds. Now this is where we see that a new panel has been formed, which has various different people from various institutes like Wildlife Institute of India and also the Ministry of New and Renewable Energy. So we see that there is this committee that has been formed, and the task of this panel is to evaluate the feasibility of underground and overhead electric lines in the critical areas for the birds in Rajasthan and Gujarat. Now at the same time, this is something that is also trying to seek some kind of other solutions to meet the sustainable development goals without compromising the bird conservation efforts, and ensure that these kind of areas remain the priority areas altogether for the birds. So that's why this committee has been asked to submit the report to the Supreme Court by July 31st. Now overall, there is one aspect that we need to understand, and the impact that the power cables can have on bird populations. Now overall, the most important and the most problematic areas here are the collision risk, that the birds which are flying at high speeds may not see the power cables in time, and that's why it may not be able to avoid that collision, and that's why it has led to fatal injuries. Now this fatal injuries, it's not that it can happen, it may happen, it has happened in a lot of cases. You'll see that there have been cases in Rajasthan, there have been cases in Gujarat, there have been cases in Karnataka, where high power transmission lines have been the reason for the fatalities in birds. So that's why we need to understand that aspect of it, and that's why it especially becomes problematic in areas where the power lines are crossing the migration lines or migration routes of the birds, or near the habitats of very large birds which have very limited maneuverability, which cannot move a lot. So that's why we understand that there are all these issues. At the same time, we understand that there are chances of electrocution of these birds, because if, for example, let's say they touch two wires simultaneously, or a wire and in the ground, then in that case they can get electrocuted, correct? So that's why especially for the larger birds like the great Indian bustard, right, because the great Indian bustards have larger wingspans, so that's why for them the chances of electrocution is even higher. So that is also one of the issues. So especially an issue for larger birds or large winged birds like the bustards or the great Indian bustard. Then they also lead to habitat fragmentation, because power lines actually can contribute to the fragmentation of the habitats, which will make the birds very difficult to access the food and also the nesting sites, and also for mating purposes their movements will be restricted. And this fact, because they know that there are transmission lines, they are afraid of getting electrocuted, they understand that, and that's why what happens is that their areas, they start getting fragmented. And this kind of fragmentation, it can also expose the birds to a lot of predators, because they know that they have a limited space to navigate around the power lines. So that's why this is one issue that also starts happening. And at the same time, a very important issue has been the disruption of the migration routes, because a lot of these power lines might also lie in the migration paths of the birds, and that's why it starts changing the migration patterns of the birds. And that's why this is something that can affect the birds' ability to reach the breeding and the breeding sites, or the sites in the winter grounds, which also impacts the survival of these birds. So that's why we need to understand all these aspects, and that's why there are mitigation efforts that we need to make with regard to this, that there are several measures that we can take to ensure that these kind of risks can be avoided. So for example, marking of the power lines, all right, marking of the power lines, installing the bird flight. So one mitigation step can be marking of the power lines. Marking of the power lines can become very crucial, because they should become more visible to the birds. All right, they become more visible to the birds, so that you can reduce the collision risk altogether. Then also maybe rerouting of the lines is also required, that wherever it is possible for us, the power lines also can be rerouted away from the critical habitat areas of these birds. So that's why rerouting. Another mitigation step can be rerouting. Another mitigation step can be rerouting, and then after that maybe also using underground cables. So this also can be a very important strategy altogether to eliminate the risk of collision in birds. Now here we are talking about the Great Indian Bustard. Now Great Indian Bustard is a critically endangered species of bird. Just remember this, that it is critically endangered. The IUCN status is critically endangered. And when it comes to this bird, it is something which is, as you can see, that it has become a symbol for grassland ecosystem conservation practices that we need to take. When you look at the habitat of this bird, primarily we see that it is found in India. Initially it was also found in Pakistan and also sighted in parts of Nepal, but now it's not found in Nepal at all. It has not been sighted in recent times in Pakistan as well. So you can say that in a manner it completely is in India only right now. And that's why when it comes to the diet of the bird, it basically feeds on seeds or insects or also reptiles. So they feed on all these, and that's why they become very crucial. So overall, when it comes to them, their behavior and their diet becomes very crucial, because they are ground dwelling birds, and that's why they are known for their very slow walk and also a very majestic walk that they have. And that's why, because they can eat all these, so you can say that they are omnivorous species, and the conservation status right now we know is critically endangered. It has been listed as critically endangered species. So these things become very crucial, because we have seen that there has been a lot of habitat loss due to agricultural expansion, due to hunting, and due to also a lot of disturbances that has happened because of the human activities. So all these things has led to the decrease in the number of these birds, and right now when it comes to the total number of birds that are left, the number lies somewhere between 150 to 200 only. So only 150 to 200 of them are left, and largely they are found in 3 states, in Rajasthan, in Gujarat, and also in parts of Maharashtra. So these are 3 states where largely they are found. Also it has been reported to be sighted in parts of Karnataka as well, but largely these are the 3 states where they are found. So, and especially because the conservation efforts are being made more in Rajasthan, so that's why Rajasthan has a central role to play. Then Ministry of Environment tightens rules on bioplastics. Now what are we saying here? We are talking about bioplastics, and there are changes that have been made in the rules to understand the various types of plastics. So what are these plastics? We'll try to understand that. First, what we see is that there are new regulations that have been imposed, so that making it difficult for disposable plasticware manufacturers to label their products as biodegradable. So overall, what it has been saying is that these products must now meet the condition that they should not be leaving behind any microplastics to be considered biodegradable. So what are microplastics also? We'll discuss about that. And there are two types of plastic waste pollution that has been identified. So there are two types of plastics that they have been identified, one being the biodegradable plastic and then the compostable plastic. So in case of biodegradable plastic, they are saying that this is something that requires treatment before the sale and must break down without leaving any microplastics. And then for the compostable plastic, they have said that it needs industrial or large municipal waste management facilities for the degradation. So we need to understand that there is a difference between these two types of plastics. And then after that, there is an amendment that also has been made in the plastic waste management rules, and that is in 2024 these amendments have been made, that it have specified that biodegradable plastics should not leave microplastics and must degrade in specific environments like soil and landfills. So that's why this amendment has been made, that there has to be an absence of microplastics. And then there are no specific chemical tests that have been established for absence or presence of microplastics, and that's why there are certain issues that or concerns that have been raised by the stakeholders, that we should have these chemical tests to identify whether or not that these things are happening or not. So that's why we see that firms are also facing challenges, that the Central Pollution Control Board has withheld the provisional certificate for biodegradability due to the stringent degradation requirements and the absence of established microplastic standards. Now what are microplastics? Because this is basically what they are talking about. What do we mean by microplastics? Now when we say microplastics, these are small plastic pieces which are less than 5 millimeters long. Alright, so you have small plastics less than 5 millimeters long. Less than 5 millimeters long. Alright, now they are the ones, they can be very, very harmful for the oceans and the aquatic life. In this context, we'll also talk about this particular picture that you see right here. Now this picture basically is something called as the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. So we'll discuss what that is. So they basically can originate from a lot of resources. I mean, when it comes to these microplastics, they are specifically harmful for the oceans and the aquatic life. They can originate from a lot of sources. For example, from the larger plastic pieces, and at the same time smaller plastic pieces. Then they also include something called as microbeads. They also include microbeads, and these microbeads are a big part of cosmetics. Microbeads, they basically are very tiny pieces which are manufactured as a part of the polyethylene plastic, and especially they are used in the cosmetic products, and many of the toothpaste, for example, it actually can have these microbeads. So overall, also apart from that, there are other skin products that you use. For example, something for exfoliating the skin or cleansing the skin. You'll see that all these actually have microbeads, and these microbeads become essentially very, very difficult to handle, and they add to a lot of microplastics. So that's why microplastics can come from variety of sources. So whether it is large plastics or synthetic fibers, or also the microbeads that are used in the personal care products or the cosmetics. And overall, they can have huge environmental impact, because they can actually have significantly negative impact on the oceans, on the aquatic life, and at the same time they can be ingested by the marine animals, that can lead to their problems also, and that has led to their downfall in their habitats as well and their populations also. At the same time, there are also health concerns that are raised with regard to the microplastics, that they can enter the food chain as well, and that's why they can also start affecting the human population also. So that's why there are all these things, and there are a lot of challenges in their removal because they are very small sized, and that's why these microplastics, they become very, very difficult to remove from the environment once they have become a part of this entire ecosystem. So that's why we need to understand that there are a lot of issues that these microplastics are causing. Now in this regard, we also need to understand something called as the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. Great Pacific Garbage Patch. Now this basically is, when it comes to this particular patch, this is a very massive accumulation of ocean plastics and all the other debris which are located largely in the North Pacific Ocean. Alright, this is located in the North Pacific Ocean. North Pacific Ocean. And that's why we have seen that there are several such patches that have now started becoming or forming in the world's ocean, and this is the largest of all of these. And when it comes to the location of this, it largely is situated between Hawaii and California and covers a huge amount of area. We say that almost 1.6 million square kilometer is the area that it is being covered. So just imagine 1.6 million square kilometers. 1.6 million square kilometers. So this is the area that it is covering, and the composition of this patch basically is largely of microplastics along with the larger plastic items as well. A lot of fishing nets etc. also have been found here. So that's why they make up but microplastics largely make up the majority of this patch. Now overall, this formation basically happens because of ocean currents. The ocean currents and largely the Coriolis effects that converge in a certain way, where we see that a large system of circulating ocean currents are formed. And this is where we see that it starts to trap the debris into concentrated areas. So that's why ocean currents, so two reasons why it is formed. One, because of ocean currents and also the Coriolis force or the Coriolis effect. So these two together are basically causing this kind of an area, the formation of this kind of an area. So overall, it has a very significant negative impact on marine life and human health also, as it becomes a part of the food chain altogether. But for the marine species especially, it drastically has a negative impact. Even for the whales or sea turtles etc., we have seen that a lot of issues are being caused because of them. So that's why we need to understand what these microplastics are. Then there are biodegradable plastics and compostable plastics that this article has mentioned. That we have something called as biodegradable plastic and there is something called as compostable plastic. So what do we mean by biodegradable plastic and what do we mean by compostable plastic, and is there a difference between the two? Now both are basically designed to reduce the environmental impact of the plastic waste, right? But they have some difference in their characteristics and their degradation requirements, and as it has been laid down in the new plastic management rules as well. Now when it comes to biodegradable plastics, they basically can be made for renewable raw material and also from the petrochemicals. So that's why just remember that there are two ways in which they can be made. Either so when it comes to the biodegradable plastic, they either can be made of renewable material, but also can be made of petrochemicals. So biodegradable plastics, now they are designed to break down through the action of the living organisms, usually the microorganisms. Now overall, when it comes to their degradation process, they can actually break down in various environments, whether in soil or in the landfills etc., and even in the marine environments they can break down. But the rate and the conditions, they basically can vary widely in this particular scenario. Now, when it comes to the compostable plastic, on the other hand, compostable plastic, basically you can say in a manner they are a subset of biodegradable plastic that can break down into carbon dioxide, water and biomass under the composting conditions, and they also may not leave behind any toxic residues. So in a manner you can say that they are subset of biodegradable plastic, and they would break down into carbon dioxide, water and biomass. And that's why they might not leave behind any toxic residue. And when it comes to their degradation process, we see that they require less specific, or they require not less, rather more specific composting conditions, and that's why they need the right temperature, moisture, microbial activities. So all these things have to be maintained to ensure that they can actually be taken care of, or they can be degraded. So that's why we see that there are specifics that in compostable plastic is bit different as compared to what we see in terms of biodegradable plastic. Now coming to a couple of revisited highlights. The first one here, there are two of these articles. One is with regard to the Agni 5 and the second one is with regard to what we have seen with the Supreme Court order. Now when it comes to this particular Agni 5, and this is something that we have covered, we saw that our Prime Minister Narendra Modi, he had announced on social media that India has now achieved the capability to deliver multiple nuclear warheads on a single missile. And that's why now India joins a select group of countries which has this capability that we can launch multiple missiles at the same time. Now this is something where we talk about Agni 5 missile, which is a long range missile, or you can say intercontinental range ballistic missile, and can travel more than 5,000 kilometers. So according to India, we say that the range is between 5,000 to 5,500 kilometers altogether. And now it has been equipped with multiple independently targetable re-entry vehicles. That is what we mean by MIRV. So this is multiple independently targetable re-entry vehicle. Now overall, when it comes to this particular scenario, we see that it was successfully tested, and when you look back into the history of Agni 5, it was first tested back in 2012, and ever since then we have seen that there are significant several enhancements that have been done in Agni 5, and this time we see that MIRV technology also has been integrated with the Agni 5 missiles. Now apart from that, we know that there are other aspects of our newer tests that we have done. For example, Mission Shakti, where anti-satellite missiles were tested by India in 2019, and that's why we know that because of these advancements, it has enhanced India's nuclear weapon programs as well, and at the same time it also enhances what we call as second strike capacity. That it also enhances our second strike capacity. Now why are we saying that it enhances second strike capacity? Second strike capacity is that when we have a capacity to strike back after being struck. So that's why it enhances our second strike capacity as well. So overall, it is very crucial for India's nuclear doctrine that has emphasized that India will have no first use policy, and it becomes very credible deterrent for India. So overall, that's why we see that it becomes very important and strategic move for India, especially against China, and also enables India to defeat the missile defenses of these countries. So that's why we see that all these things, they become very crucial in the context of MIRV technology and how it is going to be very crucial for India. And although it is something that is already being utilized by China and also is claimed by Pakistan, but it is something which becomes very crucial for India also in the context of securing its borders and securing the stability in this area. Now the next article that we have is Supreme Court stays government notification on establishing fact check unit. Now the Supreme Court of India, it had stayed a government notification from March 20th, which had aimed to establish PIB or Press Information Bureau's fact-checking unit to counter fake news related to the center's businesses. Now this stay was actually based on the petitions that were filed by the Editors Guild of India and comedian Kunal Kamra, and this is something where we saw that the stay actually has been said to last until Bombay High Court's third judge also makes a final decision on the validity of rule. So validity of this particular rule that we are talking about. So validity of rule 1BV. So now this has been noted that the Supreme Court would examine the impact on free speech and expression and come back on it. So overall, that's why we see that there are these moves which were also criticized, that there will be an over censorship by social media intermediaries, and that's why it also questioned that why are we exclusively focusing on central government's affairs only. That it is something that, I mean, if at all anything like this is being pointed out, it should be for the entire aspect of censorship, not only for the central government. So that's why there are these things that were argued, that it will give government a monopoly over the determining the truth about anything that is floating around. So that's why there are all these things, and that's why we see that this was brought to the notice of the Supreme Court, and this was then again it was argued that it would also lead to censorship which is favorable for only the central government, and it also might so happen that it will start preferring compliances over risking legal consequences, and a lot of maybe social media handles will also start behaving in a very different manner. Now lastly, coming to the mains questions that we have today. Critically examine the challenges and opportunities in achieving water security and gender equity in India. So we discussed about water security challenges that we have in India, and especially in the rural areas, and how these changes or these challenges are even more problematic for women in the country. So these are the things that have to be written in this answer. And then the next question is regarding TTP and the implications for regional security, particularly in relation to India and Afghanistan, that how TTP plays a role in this entire regional security, and what are the impacts that it has on Afghanistan and India, and maybe also the relations between Afghanistan and India. So there are certain points that you have to mention, that how insecurity in Pakistan or instability in Pakistan can have an effect on India as well. So these are the things that we need to discuss in this answer. So this brings us to the end of the session for today. Thank you very much for being here.